Hey, welcome to the Healthy Postnatal Body Podcast with your postnatal expert Peter Lapp. That, as always, will be me. You are in luck. You're listening to the number 3 charting health and fitness podcast in Kazakhstan. So you know you're in the right spot. I still can't believe that there are people from Kazakhstan listening to this. So salam to you guys and, to everybody else. Don't worry, I won't keep bringing it up forever. This is a podcast for the 21st of August, of October. I'm not that far ahead, of August. And I'm talking to the man, the myth, the legend, Brian Keane, about the perfect diet. Now, you might know Brian, you should know Brian from the Brian Keane podcast and all that sort of stuff. We're talking about the perfect diet and many, many other things. How do you go? What is the perfect diet? How do you go about finding it? What's the most important thing? Why the diet that your friend recommended to you doesn't work for you? All that sort of stuff. No, Brian is host of the Brian Keane podcast, number 1 nutrition podcast in the UK. And, you know this is going to be a good one. So without further ado, here we go. Okay, so let's start, like I said, with the easy question. So what is the best diet in the world?
It's a great question, Peter, to kick us off. And to be honest, I could go in a million different directions with it, because ultimately the best diet is the one that's in alignment with your goals that you can stick to. Mm-hmm. And then you're just reverse engineering that. So if you're postnatal, or if your goal is purely weight loss, if you are training for a couch to 5K or a half marathon, your goals are going to be different. So based on the goal, you want to reverse engineer and have a plan in place that gets you towards that goal. Now, I also have kind of things that help people keep on track. I think it's really important to include foods that you enjoy, making sure that it fits into your lifestyle and schedule, but we can unpack it in any direction you like. But I think it's very important for people to understand that there's not a one size fits all when it comes to diet out there. If that was the case, everybody would eat the same way. We'd all follow the same diet and we'd all have the results we wanted. It's a case of, well, what am I looking to do in terms of my specific goals, and what nutritional strategy and protocol do I need to follow? What foods do I need to include that help me get there?
Yeah, because that's an interesting one, because I'm sure you come across this a lot as a PT as well. The amount of people I have come to me saying, my friend did keto, so I have to do keto because that works for her or him. And therefore, that's going to work for me. That's going to be the diet for me.
It's the same as you've given me a kind of a very unintentional, I don't mean to cut across you, Peter, but just because when people say that, Karen did keto or Jane did Slimming World or whoever did X, Y, or Z, I always think, well, you wouldn't wear their shoes. I was like, and it's the exact same equivalent. Yeah. Like you might be a size 6, meaning that, yeah, you can borrow Karen's shoes, or you might follow that diet she did and it works great for you. But if you're a 7 or a 5 or a 9 or a 3, it's going to be a terrible fit, and diets are exactly the same. You're looking for the nutritional fit that works for you.
Yeah, no, absolutely. And feel free to cut across me anytime, mate. That's kind of how this whole thing works. It's because it is quite often the way diets are sold, especially in the health and fitness world. The way diets are sold are almost like it's taken all the personalization out of it, right? A lot of PTs, and I know for a fact you don't fall into this camp, but you'll have seen personal trainers in gyms like this. They sell Slim Fast, or they sell Herbalife, or they sell whatever, and therefore that is what they recommend. They don't necessarily look at their client goals. They don't adapt any diet or diet advice to their clients' goals. They just tend to go along the line of, this is what I like, and therefore this is what you will have to do. And if you don't like it, go work with somebody else.
I think it's really important for people to have a bit of a critical eye on where nutritional advice or where dietary advice is coming from. Meaning that if the person has an incentive to promote a certain product or a certain style of dieting, then there's a good chance that that person isn't going to be as objective as you probably want in a nutritionist, a dietitian, or a personal trainer or a coach that can help you. And I think the understanding that as the consumer, as the person potentially buying into a nutritional strategy or any diet out there, I think that's arming yourself with the knowledge, because we kind of want to default to trust. Like most of us will look at a personal trainer, look at a nutritionist, look at a dietitian, and especially if they're in shape or they've worked with a lot of people who they've got into shape, our mind wants to go to, well, they clearly know what they're talking about. And maybe they do, but if they're promoting a product or a diet or something, a supplement line that is very clearly incentivized for them, meaning that they're an affiliate for them or they're working with that company, then you probably have to approach it with a little bit of a critical eye and ask, well, actually, has this person got the best intentions for me, or are they trying to line their own pockets? And, I'm all for each to their own in this world. Everyone will have their different approach, but I think it's important to know that going in, because again, I'm not a fan of those companies, as you mentioned. Like, I think there's other approaches that tend to work better, but some people like them. Like, I won't throw the baby out with the bathwater completely, but it is a case of where you're getting your nutritional advice from. Like, what I love about your podcast, Peter, my podcast does this. There's other coaches out there and trainers out there who do something similar. We kind of work as a filter for people, meaning that we filter a lot of the information so people can see, well, this is the noise and this is the signal. This is where you should be paying attention. This is where you shouldn't. This is what you should be ignoring. This is a fad. This is what could potentially help you. And I think these conversations are important for that. And it brings that awareness to people. And I think that arms them with the first tool that can potentially help them with whatever dietary strategy they do decide to follow.
Yeah, no, I'm completely with you, because at the end of the day, and this is what I always try to talk about, is the whole point of a personal trainer is that it's personal to you, right? Otherwise, I'd just be a coach. I would just be a level 2 group exercise instructor. Nothing wrong with that. Those guys are making a killing and probably more money than we do. Let's be honest. But the point of a personal trainer and personalized diet advice is that it's personal to you, and that it should fit your lifestyle and, like you said, your goals.
100%. And with diets in particular, you're looking for kind of a square peg into a square hole, meaning that there might be elements of a ketogenic diet or intermittent fasting or clean eating or a Paleolithic diet or a plant-based diet that works really well for you, but you need to make tweaks and alterations to it. So, for example, my nutritional strategy is largely adapted form of paleo. I eat a lot of whole foods, nutrient-dense foods, loads of plants, but strict paleo for me doesn't make sense. With my training load, I train quite intensely. I do a lot of high-intensity runs and CrossFit and endurance events, so I need a little bit more carbohydrate that would be on a traditional Paleolithic plan or paleo diet. So you're making those slight alterations to you. So with a nutritional strategy that you're thinking of following, first you need to determine your goal. Is it to try and get your weight or body fat back down after, having your child or having a child? Or is it, you're at a different season in your life now and you just want to get into the fittest and healthiest you've ever been, so your energy levels are high? You need to determine that first and foremost. And then all you're doing is reverse engineering. Like, there are basic nutritional protocols that no one can kind of counter or argue against. Like, calories make a difference. Meaning that understanding basic caloric intake is important, i.e. not eating too many calories if you've a fat loss or weight loss goal, and things like nutrient density of food is important and can't be really counter-argued. Some foods are more nutrient dense. Plants, complete protein sources, healthy fats, your avocados, your nut butters, your complex carbohydrates to a degree, your brown rice, your quinoa. All of these foods are quite nutrient dense. So they're going to keep you feeling fueled and feeling more energized throughout the day. So you're more likely going to be able to hit whatever goal you've set for yourself, whether that's going for the gym multiple times a week or being more active, so you're going for walks after work, or just being energized so that you can play with your kids. Lots of different goals come in shapes and forms. And having the basic nutritional fundamentals of, well, this is how calories work in terms of energy out for your body. This is how nutrient density works, i.e. the foods that give you the vitamins, minerals, phytonutrients you need. And then everything else outside of that is down to, well, what works best for you. So once you know those core principles of calories and macros to a degree if you need to, but more so nutrient deficiencies and nutrient density of foods. Once you know that, everything else is nearly up for negotiation.
Yeah, because that's an interesting bit that you mentioned about, because there is a lot of there are a lot of people that have separated this stuff in the fitness industry, because I have kind of like an angle, right? They're the meat doctor that says you only need to eat red meat, or people don't eat enough red meat, and vegans are all going to die a horrible, slow, painful death. And then you have the other guys on the other side of the spectrum that say, no, you should never touch any meat whatsoever. Because it's fiber that makes all the difference when it comes to feeling fuller for longer and all that sort of stuff. And then you look at the research and look at the studies and all this stuff, and the studies actually say, guys, it's kind of both. It's protein and fiber. And you can take one element of it and you can tweak it, sure. But it's tempting to only look at the extremes. I once went to a nutrition course by a very, very big nutritionist in the UK, very famous, one of the top. You paid a lot to go to the course, and they literally said, "Yeah, calories don't matter." And that wasn't like the introduction opening statement, as in this will be a shock, and now I will explain why. That was pretty much the summation of the entire course. And I thought, okay, we spent a lot of money on this, and we have to agree on the basics. Calories matter. Calorie intake matters. That is just the way it is. The law of thermodynamics always applies. And I'm very much with you in the camp that after that, you're looking at the quality of the food you're eating, nutrient density. And macros are interesting to tinker with. But most people, and I'm guessing you get this as well, most people say, I just can't eat enough protein.
Yeah.
And you're thinking to yourself, we're in the West. Most people massively overconsume their protein macro for what their goals are. I've never come across anyone that says they can't hit their carb macros. Michael Phelps, maybe. But unless you're an Olympic level athlete, carbs are easy to hit. But everybody complains about protein. And I'm thinking that you have to understand what your goals, it's like what you said, you have to understand what your goals are and then calculate it. So how do you give your clients the knowledge to calculate it? How do you talk that through with your clients?
That's a great question. And before we get into that, I think it's important to understand what you said there. Such a great point. People never struggle to overeat or hit their carb targets for the day, but to do with their protein. And something that I tell people on that is it's worth understanding that things like fat, 3 macronutrients, fat, carbohydrate, protein, but fat and carbohydrate work as protein sparing macronutrients as well, meaning that if you are hitting your carbohydrate intake and your fat intake for the day, your protein intake doesn't need to be as high as you think, because your body will utilize that carbohydrate and fat for fuel and other things. And then you'll utilize the protein for, repair and growth. What's what most people are looking for, whether they know it or not. It's repair and growth, satiety between meals so that you're feeling full between meals, but also hitting your protein requirements on top of repairing cells and making you feel better and brain function and health and all of that comes with it, outside of obviously fatty acids from fats. But you're repairing your metabolic and keeping your metabolic rate up if you're training. It's very important for people to hit that protein requirement if they're active or moving. If you want to build muscle, great, you'll build muscle, but also the more lean muscle tissue you have, the higher your metabolic rate. So if you have a fat loss goal or a weight loss goal, having your protein intake high or hitting those minimum requirements, even adjusting your macros and fats, like we've said, you're going to be keeping your elevating your metabolism. You're going to be burning more calories while you rest. I call it the calorie burn equivalent of making money while you sleep. So even with a fat loss and weight loss goal, it's important to hit those protein requirements or even adjust them downwards slightly. You won't struggle, provided that you are hitting fat and carbohydrate requirements each day with it. So I just wanted to add that. But when it comes to educating clients, I have a bit of the way I work with people in my program. So I've been online since 2016. So I worked for 5 years as a one-to-one personal trainer, nutritionist with people in the one-to-one. And the last several years, I've been purely online with people. And I have what I call a adjust from a moving start, meaning that when somebody signs up and works with me, I'll give them a nutritional strategy based on their goals. So if they are, 60 kilos, 60 kilograms, 5'2", and they've got a weight loss or fat loss goal, they'll get a calorie plan, macro plan, recipe plan, food plan based on that. And then I basically eat my own cooking, for the, pardon the pun, that I will make adjustments to that with people. So once they have their plan based on food choices that they like, based on recipes, based on their lifestyle and their schedule, based on their specific goals, if they have a secondary goal or a third goal that they're trying to hit alongside body composition, which is where I primarily focus with people, and we'll make those adjustments as we go along. So I have basic things that I follow, similar that we touched on. Calories are something that I will keep an eye on, although there are a percentage of people who I won't track it with. If I'm working with somebody who's clinically overweight or obese, I tend to not track calories with those people, just to get them. We work off a little bit more of a clean eating protocol, and then we course correct and make the adjustments with calories. Like with calories, I think it's important for people to understand, because I never want to get lobbed into the bracket of a calories in, calories out coach, although I think they're important. I think there's so many other things to factor in, but calories for me as a coach, and the same for you, Peter, it gives us direct feedback as coaches where we might need to make adjustments for people if their body isn't responding. So it's just feedback. It's the same as somebody trying to save money. If you're looking at your bank account every day and you see that, oh, actually I spent €7 on a latte every day this week, that was €7 I probably didn't need to spend. It gives you direct feedback that you're actually spending too much money on this thing. And that's what calorie tracking and calories do. You can look at your food and go, well, actually I'm eating a muffin every day, but that muffin is topped off with icing and chocolate, and there's 360 calories there. I thought there was only about 100 calories in it. And straight away you can make an adjustment to that. And so it's giving you feedback. And when it comes to education, it depends on the individual. I'm one of those people that I love knowing exactly the calories, the macros, the nutrients within my food. I geek out on that. I love that area. So there's people out there like me, and some people I work with are like me. They like to know their calories. They like to know their macro splits. They like to know what nutrients they're getting in their food. But then you have people on the other end of the spectrum who are like what I call in books, it's like me with my car. Like if I bring my car into the mechanic, I literally couldn't care less about my car. It's 4 wheels on a piece of metal that gets me from A to B or A to Z. And if something breaks down, I don't want my mechanic explaining what happened, whether it was in the engine or another pipe or something that went. I'm like, just fix it. I was like, I don't care. Just fix it, please. And some people are like that with their diet and their nutrition. They're like, I don't actually need to know how calories work. I don't need to know macros. I actually don't care about any of that. I just want to lose weight, or I just want to lose body fat, or I just want to build muscle or tone up. And those people, I'll take a bit more of a looser approach with, where we'll focus on food choices and meal timings, and then everything in between. So when it comes to nutrition, as I said, I don't think it's a one size fits all. It's literally the reason that I still coach on my programs, because I don't think you can just hand a diet to somebody. If that was the case, I would just put it in a book and then just sell it in the book, as opposed to like say, here's the diet, and there's nothing wrong with that method. As I said, there's lots of trainers out there, dietitians, nutritionists, who will sell a one-size-fits-all diet. And that's great if we follow the analogy of the shoe size. If you're a size 6, meaning that you apply that diet and it works for you, brilliant. But it's just that there's 99 other people out of 100 who probably won't work for. But if you're that 1 in 100, amazing. You found what works best for you. I would keep that nutritional strategy for you going forward, or make adjustments to it as you need to. And I think it's that awareness around it. I would love to say, Peter, everybody eat this way at these times and you'll get your end results. It'd be so much easier. And it would, if anybody had the answer to that, they would be a multi-billionaire, particularly in the fitness industry, because of body composition change and results. But it's a bit more nuanced than that. You need to make the adjustments. But thankfully, when you do, you tend to have better short-term and long-term progress with it.
Well, and especially long-term progress, because you'll actually be able to stick to what you're, because this is the thing. I mean, I had someone on, and I can't for the life of me remember. One of the listeners can email in. I will link to it in the podcast when I figure it out. A doctor, PhD in weight management. So we're talking like the guy, one of the American leaders in this field. I had him on, and he said the only thing that matters for diets is diet adherence. End of discussion. Doesn't matter what your goal is. Diet adherence is key. He said, and that is the problem with most diets. For most people, is diet adherence, because they're choosing, willingly or non-willingly, something that doesn't actually quite work for them, and therefore adherence is almost impossible. And it's interesting what you say and about regards to your overweight or obese clients. Yeah, I personally don't track calories with Well, with hardly anyone, because I'm very much in the you want to feel better field. Okay, let's make you feel better. Because that, especially postpartum, there are a ton of postpartum weight loss coaches out there. And there's nothing wrong with that, having that as a goal. It's just not really where I come in, simply because I think there are probably one or two things that are more important postpartum than there are weight losses. Yeah. And I think there's certain restrictions, hormonal restrictions, postpartum that make weight loss more difficult. The hormonal balances, prolactin, your breastfeeding hormone, and all that sort of stuff means you're likely to retain 5 to 10 pounds anyway. So why am I fighting against nature? It'll come off when you stop breastfeeding. But I do find with most people that I speak to is that when we start eating a bit healthier, when we start eating more whole foods, exactly like what you're talking about, when we start looking at nutrient density, satiety, and all that sort of stuff, the weight almost automatically comes off when they're overweight or obese. For a lot of people, and I admit there are. You can overeat on chicken and kale as well. Don't get me wrong. But for most people, calories are important, but they're like you said, it's information. You sort the diet out first, eat as healthy as you can. If you're then not losing weight, okay, let's see if we need to address portion size and all that sort of stuff.
Yeah, there's a million ways to do it. And I think that's why conversations like this are so important, because some people will fall into the camp that it's all about clean eating, and others will fall into the camp that it's all about calorie tracking. And there's a load of different ways to potentially lose weight and reduce body fat, whether it's reducing portion sizes, whether it's tracking calories more rigidly, whether it's adjusting macronutrients so you're feeling more satiated between meals, whether it's looking at the nutrient density of your food so you're feeling more energized and your NEAT activity goes up, your non-exercise activity thermogenesis, so you're moving around more, you're walking more because you're feeling more energized, so you're burning calories that way. So there's a lot of different ways to potentially do it. It's just about finding what works best for me. It's really interesting what you said there about the doctor who was on, and I would just add to that adherence is so important. I literally think it's probably 80% of it. I wouldn't go as far to say it's the 100%, because I think you can be climbing a ladder and it can be up against the wrong wall, or you can get in the car and be driving to the wrong destination. I think having an idea of what you're actually looking to do is important, but then the adherence is really the final kind of piece to that jigsaw. And I think, as you said, it's just aligning those expectations. There's so many different ways to do it. People that can help you, whether it's you, Peter, whether it's me, whether it's another coach or another personal trainer or another nutritionist. There's lots of people out there who can help you. Or if it's a case of you putting it together yourself, you just align the expectations. Like, I'm a big believer that you can get everything you need from podcasts like this or from reading books or reading blogs, and you'll get 80% of the information yourself that you can get really good results with. The reason to work with a coach or a trainer on a program is you're cutting that learning curve. You don't want to do the trial and error yourself, and neither method or approach is right or wrong. It's just about what's going to work best for you.
Oh yeah, and especially like what you said, if you're working with a coach, as one of my lawyer clients used to put it. I used to cook for this guy when he was one of my one-on-one clients, and basically he was a weight loss client, and he trained with me 3 times a week, and a very successful lawyer. And he trained with me 3 times a week, and we sorted his diet. And then he said to me, "Yeah, actually, Peter, I don't want to train with you anymore because I'm too busy and I don't have time. I hate training. I hate exercise." And like I always say, most people hate exercise. They like the feeling afterwards. They enjoy the session, but going to train is horrible. And I train several times a week, and I still hate it. But I go because it's a routine, right? It's just what I do. But this guy didn't like it, and he had too busy a life. He said, "But I do want you to continue cooking for me." And I said to him, "I'm expensive as a chef, because first of all, I'm not a chef." He said, "Yeah, but it doesn't matter." He said to me, "Pete, you cook for me on the weekend." So once on a Sunday, I brought him like a whole stack of main meals for the weekend, and overnight oats and all that for breakfast. So pretty standard stuff, nothing too exciting. And he said, "Yeah, Pete, I make 350 quid an hour." He said, "For me, you're cheap, because I would spend 5 hours doing all my meal prep." So, and he said, "And that's on my weekend, where I value my time a lot more than I value it at the office." So I value my time on the weekend as £500 an hour. He said, you're charging me 200 quid for something I value at £2,500. He said, it's a no-brainer for him. And don't get me wrong, I'm not still doing that because, to be fair, he moved away. But it's exactly like what you're saying. You can gain all the knowledge yourself. You can. I mean, there's amazing people on YouTube. There's people like yourself on Instagram that are just and podcasts that are throwing knowledge out there that is insanely good and that is sound. But it does mean you have to spend an hour listening to a podcast in the hope that, you know, that little nugget that you're looking for is going to be there. Or you could just spend X amount of money. I'm not sure what you're charging, but it's, I don't know, if it's anywhere 50, 100, 200 quid or whatever it is for a couple of sessions and just go, you know, you sort it out. You pay for the knowledge. You have a shortcut. You don't need to buy Tom Kerridge's book and Gordon Ramsay's book and Joe Wicks's book and all that. Before you know it, you've got 10 cookbooks that all tell you, recipe books and diet books that all tell you different things. And they all have a new book every year. So you keep reading and you keep hearing different things. Where are you on those, by the way, on cookbooks in general, other than, you know, the stuff works for some people?
I think with cookbooks, it's funny because, and again, it sounds weird coming from me because I've written 4 books, 3 bestsellers, none of them cookbooks. They're all books that you read. Yeah. But there's recipes in my last book, The Keen Edge. And when I remember having the conversation, this is going a bit left field to come back to what you asked. When I was talking with my publisher about our last book, they got into the conversation about doing a cookbook and having recipes in the book. And I said something very similar to what you said there. I rhymed off Joe Wicks's, Gordon Ramsay's, several books, several books that are out there of people that have done that. And I didn't want to just do another and have another recipe book out there. I think there's millions and some people love them. Like my sister, for example, she's a PhD lecturer, research lecturer in sports nutrition, but she just hoards cookbooks. She loves them. And they're kind of her version of like collecting Harry Potter and collecting Game of Thrones. And some people have that with cookbooks. And if you love to cook and it's your meditation and it's your thing that you really love, then by all means, 100%, I think there's a time and a place, and buy the new one that comes out every year. I think if you are, and I have the same issue with nutrition and fitness books, and this is, I'm very aware, probably cutting off my nose to spite my face when I say this, as somebody who sells fitness books and nutrition books, there's a premise that the author is trying to get you to follow. And there's a bias that they're trying to bring you round to in every fitness and nutrition book that you read, mine included. And the problem with that is, if you consume too many of those books or read too many of those books, you get information overload and you get confused. And so, for example, my last book, The Keen Edge, is a nutrition book, fitness book, but it's very heavy on the mindset side of nutrition, self-sabotage, falling off track with diets, why you can't stick to a nutritional plan. So my whole premise is the mindset and the way you're approaching your nutrition is the problem, not the diet you're following. So straight away, that anchors a little bit of a bias that this is what I'm going to be potentially promoting when you're reading this book. And then if you go and read another one that says, well, carbs are the devil, or your protein is, you know, going to cause toxicity, or plants are the problem, or whatever it is, you start to get this confusion and this information overload. And that's the problem with self-education, with podcasts and books, because anybody can say what they want for the most part on a podcast, and most people can write books and either self-publish it or, you know, hybrid publish, or in my case, traditionally published. And you get all these mixed messages. The advantage to working with me, working with you, Peter, working with somebody else is it cuts straight through that noise. And you can say, well, that's not applicable to you. Somebody will send me a supplement of a client that's working with me and say, well, you know, Karen down the street is using this. And I'm like, well, look, that's not for you. You don't have this goal. Why would you add this into your regimen? This isn't going to help. Same with a food or a nutritional protocol. So with cookbooks and with fitness and nutrition books in general, I think it's important to know that going in. That's why I always am very hesitant to recommend books and fitness and nutrition books in general. I tend to bring authors onto my podcast, go through the book, and then let people decide if it's going to be a good fit for them based on the argument the author made. I think that has been my way of filtering through it. And I offer the same advice with clients when they ask me about documentaries and when they ask me about different books that they can read. I'm like, look, it depends. Just don't confuse yourself because there's so much conflicting information out there. The problem with diets and nutrition is it's more like religion and tribal than anything else. And as a result, you have, similar to what you said earlier, Peter, carnivore advocates saying that plants are so bad for you, and vegan and plant advocates saying that meat is going to destroy the world and destroy the planet and destroy your body, when the truth and the science, as of now, although science changes, is in the middle. There's a lot of pros and cons to both of those approaches. And it's very easy to get binary and black and white in nutrition in something that's extremely gray. And that becomes the problem because it leads to confusion. And I think if cookbooks, fitness books, nutrition books, or even the information you're consuming online, social media, podcasts, etc., is doing that, you probably need to narrow your field of vision and pick 2, 3, 4 people that you follow online, listen to their podcasts, consume their social media, read their books if they have books, and then just take away your field of vision until you get a better understanding of what it is that you're looking to do. So for example, like, I can listen to whatever I want to nutrition and fitness. I've been working in the industry for 10 years. I can navigate and go, well, that's not applicable. That's not evidence-backed. And I'm able to filter and navigate that. Whereas if I'm reading something on real estate or cryptocurrency or something that I am proficient in, I don't know what's right from wrong. So I have to be very mindful on where my information comes from. And I think it's useful to apply that in your own life based on whatever it is you're looking to achieve.
Absolutely. And this is an interesting thing about the Keynet. Which I believe is your last book, right? That's the one that came out this year. Because like you said, it's not a recipe book. As in, it's not a this is how you make a kale salad that will have you lose 5 pounds or something like that. It is much more, anything works for you as long as your mindset is, anything that works for you is fine as long as your mindset is right and all that sort of stuff. So yeah, you have an angle because you're selling a book, as in there's something to the book, there's a bias there, but it's not this is the magic diet book, right? Every recipe has turmeric in it, and therefore your cancer will be cured, and all that sort of stuff. And what I do find a lot of when you're talking about, especially on social media, getting great information like what you're talking about out there is so remarkably difficult because a black and white message is so much easier to sell. I genuinely wish I could have simple slogans for everything and just have things be evil and just the top 3 things I hate, or this magic recipe will do X, Y, Z. When, like you said, especially health and fitness, it's all a gray area, right?
100%. And there's an old adage in the news world that if it bleeds, it leads. And that's how social media can be. It makes way more sense from a business standpoint and from an argument standpoint and from a tribal standpoint to make those extreme claims with one side. And that's fine. As I said, I actually don't have an issue with people doing that. It's easier for me, as I said, I probably have more of a natural filter based on my background and education with it, but I don't have an issue with that. Where I start to get a bit muddied in the water is when people are getting extremely confused that are potentially working with me or consuming my content as well. And without the context of this sells. And at the end of the day, social media, and I have such a love-hate relationship with social media because I've got quite decent following on all my platforms, Instagram, TikTok, Facebook, etc. But I have such a love-hate relationship with it because although it's an incredible platform for getting your message out there, and it's literally grown my business. I used to be a primary school teacher, and social media gave me that initial 0 to 1 leg up when I joined the fitness industry 10 years ago. So I'm eternally grateful for it. But also it's condensed messages and can be condensed messages of people firing and targeting other people, other diets, other individuals for the sake of building up themselves and building up their profile. And that's okay. But if you're the consumer coming in, watching that and following that, you need to know, similar to what you mentioned earlier about the incentive of a coach who's selling Herbalife or selling Juice Plus or selling whatever it is, that there's an incentive there. And that's at the end of the day why I love podcasts so much, because we can delve into these topics. We can go deeper on things. It gives more context to situations. And I think in terms of a medium, I think books and podcasts are a very decent way of doing that. You can explore a message. It's not a soundbite Instagram reel of attacking plant-based or attacking carnivore or attacking keto or attacking fasting, or showing how incredible that plan is based on all the positive research, etc. So I think once people know that, without going too into the Pandora's box of this, like there's some basic nutritional principles to follow. I think one of the most, and this is going to sound so simplistic, and as someone who's a sports nutritionist as my background, I think eating well when it comes to nutrient density in foods, moving more so that you feel better throughout the day, and then recovering and making sure you're looking after your sleep. I think you do those three things to not oversimplify something that is probably a little bit more complicated. Most people will feel considerably better with that.
Well, yeah, because that, and that's the thing, isn't it? Everybody, well, what I find is that the whole, have you read like I think it's called the 5 Pillars? Or the 4 Pillars, or whatever that book is called. It's
yes, Dr. Chatterjee.
Yeah,
yes,
I think so. I think that's his name. It's basically that. You just do as best you can on those 4 or 5 things, and stress management and all that sort of stuff. I know is a big thing at the moment. Everybody's talking about stress management all of a sudden, which is not a bad thing, because it's about time that we start looking at all that sort of stuff. But it's, if people manage to sort those things out as best they can, chances are they'll feel better for it.
Yeah, agree. And I think it's as you said, it's a good conversation to bring up. I think stress management, particularly in 2022, off the back of the last couple of years, Peter, for sure, is definitely a conversation worth having with people.
And so where are you on things like, because I'm rather big on self-awareness, because everything we've discussed thus far with regards to setting your goals, sorting your diet, your sleep, or whatever, requires a level of self-awareness that I don't think a lot of, at least a lot of the people that I bump into don't necessarily have that. They don't know what they're eating throughout the day. They don't know what their sleep really is like. They think they went to bed at 10 o'clock last night. They don't know what time they fell asleep, that sort of thing. I'm not saying that you should track these things religiously. You should track your meals religiously. But where are you on how do you raise your clients' awareness of what they're actually doing versus what they think they're doing?
By showing them that what they focus on tends to be what expands. And if they're not bringing basic awareness to elements and parts of their life that are going to enhance their health, wellness, fitness, vitality, the areas that I specialize in, then they're not going to have a very successful return with my program or working with me. And similar to what I touched on earlier, nutrition, training or moving, whatever that looks like. Exercise is a very wide spectrum, all the way from a step count to smashing CrossFit workouts 5 days a week, 7 days a week, and recovery. So your sleep and your just recovery in general, your stress management, your cortisol, and your ability to not get stressed out either chronically or acutely throughout the day. So whatever stress management techniques falls into, I think it's all into that same umbrella. I think basic awareness is important. I don't think you need hyper awareness unless you're an extreme athlete. Sure. I used to do bodybuilding shows back in 2014, 2015, and I used to prepare people for those shows. I think those individuals need hyper awareness on their food, hyper awareness on every calorie, every macro split, every training session, every cardio, all the sleep. I think the higher you are on the spectrum, meaning that if you fall on what I tend to put people on, just to give them an idea, is a 1 to 10 spectrum. So 1 to 3 is like couch to 5Ks, first training program, haven't been to the gym before, don't fully understand food, haven't really had conscious awareness around food. Your 3 to 8s are kind of your weekend warriors, your people who are like, I go to the gym, I work out regularly, I eat well, but I want a balanced lifestyle. And then you have your 8 to 10s, which is your professional athletes, your top tier people who this is their life. It's their highest value on their ladder rung. And I think the awareness comes down to where you fall on that spectrum. So if you're listening to this podcast, ask, well, where are you on that spectrum? Are you at the very beginning in that 0 to 3, which is totally fine. All you're looking to do now is bring a little bit of basic awareness. How did you eat today? How much did you eat today? What was your portion sizes? How did you sleep? How did you sleep? Was your sleep, was the quality good? Did you sleep for 6 hours or 7 hours or 8 hours? And did you get up 5 times to go to the toilet in the middle of the night. But a little bit of basic awareness, same as your movement. Are you sitting all day or are you moving? I think then when you move into that kind of 3 to 8, you're going a little bit more nuanced. You might look at macronutrients. You might look at food choices. You might look at quality of sleep. So your REM cycles, your rapid eye movement sleep cycles, how recovered are you feeling, after those sessions? Do you need 7 hours or 8 hours or 9 hours a night to feel a 10 out of 10 in terms of a feeling of energetically how you're feeling after a good night's sleep? And then if you're at the top end of that spectrum, which is a tiny percentage of people, you're obviously going to have hyper awareness on everything you're doing.
Yeah, and that's fascinating, like you said, because I come across this an awful lot, and you probably do as well, that people who are 0 to 8, or 0 to 3 especially, because I think the 4 to 8 kind of know where they are. They just make some tweaks, but they're kind of on the ball. They're kind of where they want to be. They're kind of where they need to be for general health. It's the people who are starting early on, so who are just starting out, that 0 to 3 category that you mentioned. They think they have to be like an 8 to 10. So they come at you like, okay, but this is what the Olympic level athlete does. And this is therefore what I need to do to achieve. Yeah, if you're an Olympic level athlete and that is your goal, then sure. But this is not what your starting point is, because it becomes impossible. And
it's a mic drop there, Peter. Like applying an extreme approach for a non-extreme goal is the recipe for failure.
It really is. And we come across this a lot because this gets sold a lot, right? Every piece of equipment in a gym, like a TRX is a prime example for it. Don't get me wrong. I love a suspension trainer. But when I used to work for, let's say, a high-end chain gym in the UK, and there is only one, so everybody knows I'm talking about David Lloyd, right? But we were told you had to do these taster sessions to sell people on personal training. Did you ever work in a box gym?
I did. I worked in Fitness First. I know exactly where you're going with the story.
Yeah. So you have to then say, because these people get a free program. So that doesn't make the club any money and doesn't make me any money as a PT. So I need you to buy PT. And that was the way that they sold. You had to do taster sessions on the TRX, usually 10 minutes, showing people how a complex piece of equipment works. And we had vipers and we had kettlebells, and every single taster session that you did had to be along the line of the TRX was invented by a Navy SEAL. Right? Viper was started by someone from the Royal Marine Commandos and who did 5 tours in Afghanistan and wanted to keep his core strength up. Kettlebells are used by the Russian FSB as it is now. And you're talking to people who are couch 5K people who are just like, dude, I just made it to the gym. I'm happy to be at the gym. Show me how to do some bicep curls or something. I'm just happy to use a treadmill. Selling that extreme, the whole fitness world is kind of, or a lot of the fitness world is kind of set up that way. Look at what all these cool people can do. Wouldn't you like to be one of those cool people? And I think realistically, the answer to that, wouldn't you like to be one, is no, because I am not willing to put in the sacrifices those guys make. I'm a 48-year-old PT, right? I'm not going to train like any professional athlete is going to train. I'm not going to be like a Commonwealth level swimmer. I mean, if or like Andy Murray preparing for Wimbledon or anything like that. There is such a big gap between, like what you say, the 0 to 3, 4 to 8, and the 9s and the 10s. I mean, that gap is huge.
Huge.
I mean, people genuinely, even I used to train a football player, a professional football player in the SPL. So in the Scottish Premier League, for Americans listening to it, that's the highest league in Scotland. Admittedly, it's not a very good league, but you know the guy gets paid to play football. So he's a professional athlete. Even the gap between the SPL and the English Premier League or La Liga is so big that the fitness levels of these players is incomparable. The top 1% of people, you don't have to train like Cristiano Ronaldo. That's all I'm saying. You don't have to have 5-6 hours a day. You don't even have to train at the level that I'm training. You don't have to go to the gym 5-6 times a week. You don't have to eat like I eat. And like what you said, you do CrossFit and you do a lot of high intensity stuff is on your Instagram feed and all that sort of stuff. People want to do Zumba, they can do Zumba, right? Mm-hmm. There is no one better way to do it, is all I'm saying.
And it's about what you enjoy as well. I think exercise gets overcomplicated. Like, I think it's important to see where people fall on an exercise spectrum. Like, I am one of the people who loves to work out and always have. I came from a sporting background and I love to work out and I love to train. So that doesn't feel like effort to me or work. Like, I like to push it that difficulty or to that level of difficulty in my workouts. Whereas if you're someone who doesn't like to train, you're looking at what I call in books the MED, your minimum effective dose. What's the minimum amount of working out or training that you need to do to hit your end goal? And then, because you can be consistent with that, like most people can do 2 to 3 workouts per week and hit a daily step count, or maybe get a standing desk or be a little bit more active. You don't need to go 5, 6 times a week, 7 times a week. I actually don't think anybody needs to go 7 times a week unless you're maybe Ronaldo, as you said, or Lionel Messi or someone along those lines. And I think that's important to understand, because it's very easy to look at my Instagram page or other fitness influencers, or quote unquote putting people under that umbrella bracket, and go, well, I need to do what they do, but maybe they love what they're doing and you don't. So that's an important distinguishment to make, because your approach is going to be different based on what you enjoy.
Oh no, absolutely. And it's, and like I said, the same goes for diet. Right at the end, you mentioned this, and we come full circle because you mentioned this in the beginning. I don't mind eating loads of spinach. I like spinach. I'm Dutch. I like spinach. It's one of the few things we grow in Holland, and therefore I was raised on the stuff. I drink a lot of milk because I was raised on that sort of stuff. If you don't enjoy those things, you don't have to eat them. Yeah. It is that simple. It's very tempting to fall into the, let's look at what this guy is eating or this woman is eating or whatever. And therefore that is what I should eat, or that's what I should be doing. Especially when if your life isn't the same way, because we can all train 7 hours a day, right? We could all spend 7 hours if you have nothing else to do. And you mainly see this with movie actors. A friend of mine is a personal trainer, and he trains, let's say the B-list Hollywood star. So he doesn't train The Rock, but he trains the level below that. So people who studio pays to train him for films, for a certain look. And he's a wonderful personal trainer. I mean, the guy is amazing. But he only works with people who have nothing else to do during the day. Because these guys all and women all get paid to do nothing else. So, I went to watch Thor yesterday. I know I'm a bit late to the party, but the last Thor movie, and everybody knows that Hemsworth looks insane, right? Yeah. But Natalie Portman is in that film, and Natalie Portman plays female Thor. I don't know if you've seen the thing, but she looks in tremendous shape. So I'm bound to get some people saying, I would like arms like Natalie Portman has. But then people don't realize that Natalie Portman trained 3-4 hours a day. Her diet was on point because the studio paid for her chef, and she has nothing else to do during the day other than recover. Because if you train 3 hours a day, you can bet your ass that 5 hours have to be recovery time, because otherwise you're ruined for the following day.
It's funny you say that, because I did a podcast, Peter, with Magnus Ligback, who is an LA Hollywood trainer. He prepares people for most of the, I'm not sure if Natalie Portman's on his list, actually, now that you say it, but he trains people for the Marvel movies. So he was talking about the regimen when he was preparing Alexander Skarsgård for The Northman, Ben Affleck for Batman, people along those lines. Yeah. But I had people messaging me off the back of that going, I didn't realize that this is, and it sounds really obvious. They said it to me after. They're like, it sounds really obvious, but I would get DMs on Instagram, people going, I didn't realize the amount of work and short timeline that those people transform their bodies, but this is their full-time job. And I'm like, yes. I was like, this is literally, as you said, Peter, is what they get paid to do, working with these trainers, working with these chefs, preparing for those movies. And it just realigns those expectations with, if you are not in that position, then your timeline and this ridiculous 6 or 8 or 12-week transformation that a Hollywood star could potentially do might not be realistic for you if you've got, 2 kids at home and you're working a part-time or full-time job.
For sure. And, that, like I said, that brings us right back to the beginning, that finding what your goal is and making your goal realistic for you. Because, we all have the idea that I want to run a marathon by the time I'm 50, some shit like that. I just also hate running. So I'm not going to run a marathon, right? Do you know what I mean? As in, I might well have it as a vague goal, but if I'm not willing to put the effort in, that should always be the second question. Is your goal realistic for you? As far as I'm concerned, you just say, this is what my goal is. I want to run a marathon in August or something like that. And I go, well, okay, I've only got 3 weeks. I can't manage 5K yet. So I probably should manage my expectations a little bit because I have other things to do that fit around my life.
Yeah, I think asking, is the juice worth the squeeze, is always a good way to approach, like I think if you apply that with whatever it is you want to do, whether it's a marathon or losing weight or whatever, you won't go too far wrong.
No, exactly. And on that happy note, was there anything else you wanted to touch on, mate?
No, Peter, really enjoyed this conversation. Thank you so much again for bringing me on. And I know that you're serving that postpartum, postnatal space tremendously well. So as a fellow podcaster and person who's trying to influence people in my space, I love that you're covering this as well. So keep doing what you're doing, mate. And thank you so much for bringing me on.
Lovely. Thanks very much. On that note, I will happily press stop record here. And press stop record is exactly what I did. Thanks very much to Brian for coming on. I mean, and I love Brian. I love his attitude about stuff. He's always positive. He's always optimistic. And he's one of those guys that, you spend an hour with, you feel better after the hour. He has a tremendous amount of knowledge. His books are well worth a read. I will link to absolutely everything, the website, his podcast. Make sure you catch that if you don't already listen. And he gets a lot more listeners than I do. So I'm guessing that, you do listen, at least in the UK he does. Follow him on Instagram, Facebook and all that sort of stuff. You can buy his books on Amazon. They're well worth reading. Like I said, his last book, like he mentioned, is much more to do with mindset and all that sort of stuff. And overall, like I said, I absolutely love the guy. So, check him out. What are we doing? There isn't in the news this week, simply because I haven't done one in a while. So let's have a look. So, and this is what I found. See, can you tell the not so subtle editing process that I have? Obviously, Brian's interview was recorded a while before this all came out, and then I have to do the outro record and all that sort of stuff. Then I send it off to whoever the guest is for their approval and all that sort of stuff. And then, I add the last bit when everything is through. So now we're at the last bit. And I found it great in the news this week. It took me a while to find something, to be honest, because there hasn't been an awful lot in the news recently. It's slow news. Everyone's on holiday, right? First of all, a little mention. I interviewed Dawn Barclay a while ago on the podcast in April, I think it was, about her book is called Traveling Different. We spoke about traveling with neurodiverse kids and all that sort of stuff. Well, her book is out. And it's already got a start rating from Library Journal or something like that. So congratulations to Dawn. This is one of those massive books that I think will be very useful for everyone. And I told her I'd give it a mention. So there you go. If you're a parent of a neurodiverse kid, or someone who is, and you're thinking, this book might come in useful, it's called Traveling Different, and then there's a whole long title after, so I will link to it in the podcast description. I had COVID this week, so I'm sounding a bit iffy, maybe, but hopefully not worse than usual. In the news this week, because that's where we are, and then we'll wrap this thing up, and then I can go back to lying in bed slowly. Contemplating becoming a COVID-related statistic. Right, from WBUR, which is an American site, the nation's first vaginal fluid transplant offers hope for millions. And this is an interesting article, and I will link to the thing, because apparently. We're talking bacterial vaginosis, BV. Apparently 1 in 3 women in the US suffers from this at any given moment, and numbers much higher in certain groups. Again, it's a sort of condition that's much more prevalent in African American people, according to this, and it's linked to some serious long-term health issues and all that sort of stuff. And the interesting thing is that, as with all these type of things, it's a woman problem, and therefore, it's maybe it's an embarrassing woman problem, and therefore, there's no money to be made out of it. So, yeah, medicine is a little bit behind. We know this when it comes to treating women's issues, especially when it comes to women of color's issues. Right? The priority isn't there. We make little blue pills, but we don't do this sort of stuff. Anyways, bacterial vaginosis. So I'm guessing the numbers in the UK will be just about as high, right? It doesn't make sense for the numbers to be 30% in the US and 0 in the UK. So this is interesting. This is basically they've transplanted vaginal fluid from one woman who had a healthy vagina to a woman who had an unhappy vagina. Basically, as it says here, take fluid from a happy vagina, put it in an unhappy one, and see what happens. Much like fecal transplant and all that sort of stuff. Fecal transplant stuff is also relatively new. The study Bodo, I remember talking about this, I think, a few years ago, after listening to it on Radio 4's medicine program. I can't remember what that's called. Anyways, it's still relatively new. I'm not saying there's going to be a solution tomorrow, but it comes down again to the microbiome. It comes down to taking care of your bacteria properly. And, we're only just starting to realize just how important this is. I had Dr. Hugh on a while ago now, and I know I've mentioned this before. He has the PhD in the microbiome and all that sort of stuff. And as he explained, that it's new stuff, but it's very, very interesting. Hopefully this comes to something. Obviously we can't be handing out little bottles of vagina juice and all that sort of stuff everywhere. But this might be as a sort of a do-it-yourself home kit or something like that. That shouldn't be the case. But hopefully they will keep investing a bit of money into this, and then, we can crack on and get these problems solved. Because interestingly enough, an actual transplant, according to this, is remarkably simple. The actual collection of the fluid is very difficult, but the transplant is basically, as the doctor here said, they use an eyedropper, a speculum exam, and with the eyedropper, put the fluid into the vagina, they have the person lie there for 15 minutes, and that's it. So it'll be interesting to see. Some trials are being run in Denmark and Israel and all that sort of stuff. Be interesting to see where it goes. But hopefully, some money will be spent on this sort of stuff, and we will come up with a solution. So if you're suffering from this hope might be around the corner. Anyways, that's all from me, Peter at healthypostnatalbody.com. If you have any questions or comments, then, you get in touch, let me know. And I'll check in on you next week when I believe I have a wonderful interview with Kelly next week, coming out next week. Oh, but you're going to love. Kelly is amazing. We're talking meditation, micro habits, and all that sort of stuff. She's very popular already, and for good reason. Right, anyways, that's me done. You have a lovely week. Take care of yourself. Bye now.
Like some shit you hear in stories. If only these four walls could talk. More than just a little tipsy. He got me wide so I won't talk. Hey there girl, give me a cup. I don't think it's strong enough. You're thinking about it way too much. bruises and to bump me.